It's the Happy Families podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
If we see that our kids are depressed, we don't need to fix it. We don't need to make them all better. We don't need to try to drag them out of that depression. But what we do need to do is understand why their thinking stinks.
And now here's the stars of our show, my mum and dad.
It's Mental Health Awareness Month. G'day, this is Justin and Kylie. We are the parents of 6 kids. I'm the founder of happyfamilies.com.au, and this is the Happy Families podcast. All this month, we're going to be talking about issues related to mental health of our children, mental health of us as adults, and all things related to inside and outside of mental health and how it relates to our well-being. Today, a conversation about depression. We're going to speak specifically about kids and depression, although I think that you'll find that there's a whole lot of overlap between the things we're talking about with our children and even the experience of depression that we have as adults. But because it's Mental Health Awareness Month and because depression is such a common and prevalent mood disorder, it needs to be talked about.
Well, since mental health is something that every single one of us will have either experienced personally or with people that we love, I think it's a really good opportunity for us to actually take a look at what depression looks like, especially in our kids, because it looks different for different people, right?
It does. And quite often I'll hear people say, oh, my child's depressed or I'm depressed. And they're not actually depressed, they're sad. There's a big difference between being sad and having depression. I mean, you can actually be depressed and not have depression. Depression as a mental illness is specific. It's diagnosable, and it's different to having a bad day or feeling miserable or being exhausted and stressed and tired.
Well, and then you hear the stories of people, you look at someone like Robin Williams, the comedian, the laughter that fills the room, and yet was deeply, deeply depressed. And so it's going to look different for different people. So what is the difference between having, say, a depressive episode or having a bad, lousy day or week and full-blown depression? How do we, compartmentalize it?
So there are 3 different things here. The first thing that I would say is kids, grown-ups, all of us, we all have days where we're cranky or we're tired or we think negatively. I mean, I had a day the other day where I walked into the room and I said, I'm sick of it. I'm getting it all wrong and I'm tired of being a parent. I'm really bad as a husband and I'm over it all. And I walked out of the room. That doesn't mean that I've got depression, but right there and then I was angry and I was frustrated and I was tired and I was stressed and I was really, really sad. You could even say that I was depressed. My mood was depressed. I was feeling horrible.
Yeah, and then what happens when that goes on for a week?
Right. So the difference between having a bad day and feeling sad or blue or low or frustrated and having a depressive episode is where we have a sustained period where thinking is stinking. So we have that catastrophic kind of thinking, that awful thinking all the time about ourselves.
This always happens to me. Nobody loves me.
Right, yeah, the all or nothing kind of thinking, the pervasive, permanent, personal kind of thinking. That's a sign that we might be slipping into what you could call a depressive episode. So not just feeling lousy, but actually having this sustained period where that's going on and behavior syncs with it or becomes more erratic or becomes more volatile and mood is low. Once we experience a depressive episode, we definitely know the difference between that short term, I'm having a lousy day or a lousy night or a lousy whatever, and I'm actually feeling depressed. But even if you're having a depressive episode for a few days, maybe even a week, could even be 2 weeks, where you're just in a slump and it's sustained, that doesn't mean you've got depression. So there's a depressed day, there's a depressive episode, and then you've got a diagnosis of clinical depression. And the difference ultimately, if your child is depressed or even if you are depressed, you're more often than not over a sustained period of time having negative feelings about yourself or your situation or the future. And it's really about that sustained period of time. For adults, most psychologists won't diagnose depression unless it's been going on for a minimum of 6 months. Now, I know some psychs will say, oh, with kids, it's a shorter period, but we really, I was going to say we really want to see this happening long term, but we don't want to see it happening at all. But if we're going to give a clinical diagnosis of depression, then we want to make sure that this is an ongoing and sustained thing. The most important thing for us as parents is to get in early. Like if we see that our kids are depressed, we don't need to fix it. We don't need to make them all better. We don't need to try to drag them out of that depression. But what we do need to do is understand why their thinking stinks, or why their mood is so low, or why their behavior is subdued or erratic or volatile. And if we can understand what's going on in the environment, then we can start to move away from fears of a clinical depression diagnosis, because that starts to get really serious. Those ingrained patterns of thinking and behaving, they can become much more entrenched over time. We want to get in nice and early, and psychological help is available to really make a big difference there.
So what are the signs that we're looking for in our children if we are concerned about depression playing a part in there?
Yeah, so I'd say there's a handful of things. First off, they're going to seem sad and unhappy most of the time, and that's different to being sad or unhappy today. But if it's today and tomorrow and the day after and the day after and next week and even next month, and there's this sustained period of sadness, unhappiness, misery.
Would you put apathy in there?
Yeah, that's right. So we could call that apathy or amotivation. So the PATH, the pathy side of things, we use that empath idea or pathological. The PATH, that revolves around what's going on inside us. So if we have apathy, the A means that it's missing. It's not there at all. So there's nothing emotional. There's nothing happening at all inside. So apathy is also a really big warning sign that, especially sustained apathy over time, that we've got a child who may be depressed. If they're aggressive, having a lot of temper tantrums, big outbursts, volatile with their moods, and then subdued and don't want to leave their room. If they're afraid or worried all the time, if they're having those psychosomatic symptoms like my tummy hurts or my legs hurt or my arms hurt, if they're always saying things that are negative about themselves, I'm no good, everybody hates me, I can't do it, it's too hard. So you're seeing that subdued energy. They don't want to be around anyone. Like I said, they're withdrawing to their room. They're not finding joy in things that they used to find joy in, whether it's eating or activities. Often you'll find somebody who's depressed will have sleep issues. Usually with kids, they'll sleep too much, but sometimes they can't sleep at all, or they have nightmares. It's those kinds of things. And then you'll see school performance drop as well, because when you're feeling lousy socially and you're feeling lousy emotionally and you're feeling lousy in all of the ways, then why would you bother trying at all? So they're your biggest warning signals.
So as a parent, if I am watching over a sustained period of time, these kinds of symptoms showing up in my child, can I do anything? Like, can I help them get through this? Or is this something that they're going to have to ride through and need a psychologist to kind of work them through?
It's a really tricky one, because we do know that there are things that work to reduce the symptoms of depression. The best thing psychologically is to get cognitive behavioural therapy. What's really going on with depression is we are experiencing what you might call cognitive distortions. There's a whole list of cognitive distortions that are going on, where there's this awfulizing, catastrophizing, there's the all or nothing thinking, there's the predicting the future, fortune telling, but it's always with a negative slant. There's the mind reading, where we think we know what everyone's thinking about us and saying about us, even though we've got no idea what's going on in their minds. There's all those, they're cognitive distortions. And cognitive behavioural therapy with a clinical psychologist, or in fact, even any registered psychologist, and even many counsellors, can work really well with somebody on those CBT practices to shift the cognitive distortions. But you don't have to have a psych degree or a counselling degree. You don't even have to be a medico. You can just be a parent who cares about your kids and do a range of things that can help your kids to get through these subdued moods and these depressive episodes in really effective, really caring ways. Probably worth spending a few minutes on those. I've just made a list while we've been talking. I've got eight really quick things that I can talk about that can be really helpful.
Well, what's number one?
You know what? I just thought of a ninth thing, and I'm going to make that number one because I can't help myself. I'm so sorry. But here's what I want to emphasize. I use this metaphor a lot in my presentations. I might have even shared it on the podcast before, and that is that an emotion or a mood is like a train going through a tunnel. So when the train goes into the tunnel, especially if we're talking about a dark kind of mood like depression, everything goes dark, everything goes black, and you end up deep inside the tunnel. And what we do as parents is we say, oh no, the train's in a tunnel. That is, we're going through this big emotional moment, and my job is to rescue my child. I need to pull out the earth-moving equipment. I need to dig down through the top of the mountain and make a great big hole and pull the train out and bring it back into the daylight. That's kind of what we try to do with our kids when they're having those big, deep, dark emotions. And yet, if we simply sit with our child and say, you're like a train in a tunnel, but trains always come out of the tunnel eventually. What that does, it actually takes the pressure off our child. It means that they don't have the feeling that, oh no, there's something wrong with me. It normalizes the emotion.
You're kind of suggesting it's an acceptance.
Right.
That where you are right now is where you are,
yeah.
and it's okay.
Fighting against it only deepens and further entrenches it. Now, that doesn't mean that we just want to accept that we've got a child who's depressed and we're just going to let them stay in the tunnel for the next 6 months while they work through their depression. There are things that we can do, but it's the acceptance that allows us to move into the next 8 ideas that I've got that help us to move our children forward.
As I've experienced personally some depressive episodes over, the years, it's only been recently that I've recognized just how important just being kind to myself and accepting that I'm just feeling this way now, but it's not the way it's going to be forever.
Yeah.
Has made such a difference in me being able to move through it a lot quicker than it was back in the day where I was just berating myself all the time because I couldn't work out why I felt the way I did when I had such a blessed life. I had so much to be grateful for, and yet I just felt like everything was too hard.
A little bit of self-compassion. So the first thing is just be accepting, because that means that you'll be able to move on with some more proactive strategies. Doesn't mean acceptance is, well, I'll shrug my shoulders and say, oh, well, if you're depressed, and I'm just going to leave you be in your bedroom. That's not what it is. It's about sitting with your child and saying, it's dark here, isn't it? And it's okay. We all have these times. It's not an unusual part of being human to feel like this, and I'm here for you. So you've talked about self-compassion for you as an adult, but for a child, we're showing compassion. We're sitting there in their suffering and we're suffering with them. Because then we can say, so now that we know that this is normal, there's a handful of things that we could talk about that can help. Let's talk about those things. Are you open to that? And what you'll find is because of the acceptance and the compassion, your child's more likely to say, yeah, actually, I am open to it because you're not making me feel bad for feeling bad.
So what's number 2?
Number 2, which was number 1, is just breathe. Literally, just breathe. And if you can, breathe outside. So nature, I say this all the time, it's my favorite thing to say about being outside. Nature is fuel for the soul. And when you're feeling lousy, seeing a sunset or a sunrise, or sitting in a park and looking at the trees or the clouds, or sitting on the beach and watching the waves rolling in, or actually getting active in nature, there's just something incredible about breathing and being in nature. And if you can't be in nature, at least breathe. But if you can breathe in nature, that's better. Even if you're laying in the backyard on the grass or on the trampoline or something like that, there's something that can shift a mood just by getting our breathing under control, being intentional with our breathing.
Recently, a friend gave me a handful of affirmation cards. They're absolutely beautiful. And one of the techniques that the affirmation talks about is when I breathe in, to breathe in that golden warmth of sunlight and to breathe out the fog.
That sounds like an affirmation card.
Doesn't it? But it's just having that visual.
It does. It sounds beautiful.
Because I love sitting in the sun. There's something about it, even when your eyes are closed, you can just feel the warmth wash over you. And yet when you're in that dark cloud space, it's hard.
Yeah, it really is. Now, our podcast time is pretty much up, so I'm going to move through these
Give
next
me
ones
the next one.
quickly. Move. Research abundantly, overwhelmingly, phenomenally, categorically, in every way tells us that if we move our bodies, we experience a well-being impact, a positive well-being impact. Run, swim, climb, ride, wrestle, whatever. Just if you can help your kids to move, they will feel better.
The next one?
Connect. Now, this is really hard when you're depressed because usually a conversation stinks and no one wants to talk to you because you're depressed and you're miserable. But if we can help somebody who's feeling low to connect in positive and meaningful ways with someone who cares, again, it's one of the biggest predictors of well-being is having high-quality relationships where connection counts.
So when I'm having a struggle
yeah,
and my conversation stinks, one of the most beautiful tools that you have used in our relationship is to just hold me. The best connection that I can have when I'm in that space where I can't see any good is just having somebody I love just hold me and say, it's okay, I'm here. And I think our kids would respond really well to just knowing that we love them.
Yeah. And we can even say things like, I really want to be with you right now because I can see that you're feeling awful. Can we just hug? And
I'm not here to fix it.
Yeah, and if they say no, then respect that as well. You might say, or would you rather have some space? Can we hug, or do you need some space? And if they say I need some space, you can say, all right, well, I'm going to come back in, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 20 minutes, and I'm going to check on you. And do that based on how old they are and how they're really feeling. But just check in and invite those connections. Let me share a couple of other ones real quick. Learn, be curious, explore the world, lean in. Todd Kashdan from George Mason University, one of my favorite researchers, talks incessantly about the power of curiosity for overcoming things like depression and anxiety. The research is there. It shows that being actively involved in a learning process helps us to overcome these mood disorders and mental health challenges. The next one, serve, help. Do something for someone else. When we get out of our own way, when we get out of our own head and we go and do something that makes a difference for someone else, it's powerful. And if you've got young kids, maybe you can go and volunteer at a nearby, a church soup kitchen or something like that for the homeless, but it doesn't have to be that big. You might just make some cookies and go and deliver them to the old lady that lives 4 houses down the street. Or you might find a way that you can make some cupcakes and go and visit the Fireys or the Ambos and say, hey, we just really appreciate what you do in our community, and we wanted to come and give you something as a token, as a recognition of how much we appreciate the service that you give our community. Or maybe you go down to the local surf club and volunteer down there. Like there's so many different things that you can do if you can just sort of think outside of your 4 walls of your home.
A couple of weeks ago, our 18-year-old went out with a friend, and she came home. She said, "Can I tell you what I just did?" And she and her friend had written a whole heap of little handwritten notes with just, beautiful thoughts. Hope you have a great day today. You're awesome. Sun's shining, whatever she wrote. And they went and stuck it on people's windscreen underneath their wipers as they walked down the car park at the beach the other day. And I just thought it's such an easy thing. You don't actually know how it's going to impact somebody's day, but it left her with a huge smile on her face and a bounce in her step.
Sharing a little light. My last couple of ideas are pretty simple. Make a plan. Make a plan. Just say, all right, you're feeling lousy, but let's make a plan. Who do we need to talk to? What can we do? How can we move in a positive direction even on days when we're feeling lousy? And it's not about fixing. It's about recognizing that if we feel lousy, we know these things can help and we want to help. And I think the last point that I would make is get help. Get help. Go and see your GP. See a psychologist, see a counsellor, talk with the school counsellor, the pastoral carer, the wellbeing officer, whoever it is. And there are solutions. There are wellbeing solutions that are available for kids who are struggling with depression and other mental health challenges. And these kinds of ideas are empirically shown to move the needle and just help to alleviate that burden of depression.
Well, I'm going to add a 10th one because as you were talking, it just was really apparent to me as a parent to take care of our own mental health. It's so easy when we are with somebody who is struggling to slowly catch their emotion. And if we're not doing the things that we know are important for our own well-being, it can be very easy for us to spiral alongside them. It's so hard being a parent watching our kids struggle, and it's very easy for us to kind of fall down. So number 10 for me would be make sure that you're doing what you need to take care of your mental health, and recognize that when you seek help, that help is going to be for you too, because you're carrying the weight of watching your child struggle and not being able to fix it.
Tomorrow on the Happy Families podcast, digital self-harm, the rising trend of teens cyberbullying themselves. And on Wednesday, we're going to be talking about men's postnatal depression. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so our podcasts are primarily centred on these kinds of ideas. Oh, a quick reminder as well, on Wednesday night, we've got our free webinar, what to do when you're feeling burnt out. Please join us. All the details are at happyfamilies.com.au. The podcast, as always, produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. Craig Bruce is our executive producer. And if you'd like more info about the things we've talked about today, please check out the show notes at happyfamilies.com.au.